They say storms bring trouble, but that night, the snowstorm brought a miracle. Nate Hollis, just 22 and working the northern pasture of the Larkspur Ranch, wasn't expecting company. Not in that kind of cold. Not with the wind howling, like wolves in the snow swallowing his boot prints before he could take the next step. But that's when he saw her, curled up in a tattered blanket beneath a cedar tree, not much bigger than a loaf of bread. A baby. Skin pale from the cold, cheeks chapped red, but eyes open. Barely. She didn't cry, just looked at him like she already knew him. Nate had never run so fast in his life. By the time he reached the bunkhouse, the others had gone silent, watching this half-frozen cowhand crash through the door with a bundle in his arms and fear in his chest. "Get towels, fire, anything," he shouted, and the cook, old Murph, dropped a pot of beans on the floor as everyone scrambled. They wrapped her up, set her near the stove, and waited. Hours passed. She didn't make a sound. But she didn't leave either. By dawn, she was breathing steady, warm, and wrapped in one of Nate's old shirts. Nobody came looking for her. No riders on the ridge. No desperate knock at the barn doors. Sheriff checked around. Nothing. No missing baby, no abandoned wagon, no mother crying into the snow. So Nate gave her a name. Lily. Like the flower that pushed up through mud just to feel the sun. And though he was barely more than a boy, with a busted past and no kin of his own, he made up his mind that she wouldn't grow up wondering if she was wanted. Because she was. From that first moment under the cedar tree, she was his. Lily grew up quick, faster than the other kids around. Town, not just in size but in spirit. She had a steadiness about her, like the land itself, and a sharp tongue when folks made the mistake of calling Nate her keeper instead of her pa. He'd just smile, tip his hat, and let her handle it. She didn't know the truth. Not yet. Nate never found the right time to tell her she wasn't born of his blood. Maybe he was afraid. Maybe he thought love was enough. Maybe he just didn't want her to carry that kind of ache. But time's funny. It doesn't slow down just because you're not ready. And one day, when the leaves were just turning and the wind had that whisper of winter in it again, Lily found something Nate had hidden deep in the old trunk behind the saddle rack. A threadbare blanket, a newspaper clipping, and a small silver locket with no picture inside. She didn't say anything that night, just sat a little quieter during supper, asked a little more about storms, and when Nate looked up from his stew and met her eyes, he knew the questions were coming. Maybe not tonight, but soon. And just like that, the quiet ranch hand who once found a baby in the snow was about to lose the little girl who made him whole. The next morning came soft, with a mist clinging low over the grass like breath not yet exhaled. Nate saddled, his horse slow, hands steady, heart unsure. Lily hadn't said a word about what she'd found in the trunk. She just moved through her chores like usual, quiet, careful, like she was turning something over and over in her mind. When he finally worked up the nerve to speak, she beat him to it. "Pa," she said, not looking up from brushing the mare. "How old was I when you found me?" He swallowed. "Little. Maybe 3 weeks, maybe less. The doc said you were lucky to be breathing." She nodded, still brushing, the horse in long, even strokes. "You ever find out who left me?" "No," Nate said honestly. "I tried. Sheriff asked around, looked through wagon trails, birth notices, even rode out to Fort Timber. Nothing ever came back." "Was I in a basket?" "Nope. Just a blanket. Torn up and thin. Looked like someone tried to wrap you in it, best they could." There was a long silence. Then she turned and looked right at him. "Why'd you keep me?" He blinked. "Because you were mine the second I picked you up. I didn't think about it, I didn't weigh it. I saw you there, shivering and small and still breathing, and all I knew was I couldn't let you go. That's it." Lily didn't say anything for a moment. Then she nodded, slow and certain. "Okay." He'd expected more questions, maybe even anger, but instead she walked over and hugged him like she used to when she was little, tight around the middle, head pressed against his chest. Nate hadn't felt that kind of relief in years. She didn't push him away. She didn't run. Still, something had changed. That afternoon, Lily skipped her usual ride into town. Instead, she stayed back, polishing old tack in the barn, sorting through boxes Nate hadn't touched in years. When he walked past later that evening, he saw her holding the locket, turning it over in her palm, staring at it like it might blink. "I want to find her," she said. voice barely above a whisper. Whoever left me. I just need to know why. Nate leaned on the doorframe, hat in hand. You sure? No, she said, her voice trembling slightly. But I've got this ache, Pa. It's not about leaving. It's about not knowing. He nodded, the weight in his chest familiar. Then I'll help you look. That night they sat by the fire, just the two of them, a map of the Western Territories spread between them. Nate pointed to every town he'd visited while searching all those years ago. Lily took notes, asked about the name of the sheriff, the midwives, the trading posts, and when Nate asked her what she was hoping to find, she said something that knocked the breath from his lungs. I'm not looking for a mother, she said. I already had one. I just want to know what kind of woman loved me enough to leave me with a chance. Nate stared into the fire for a long time after that. Maybe love did look like abandonment sometimes. Maybe a woman, cold and desperate, did the bravest thing she could by walking away. Lily went to bed early. Nate stayed up, sifting through the past with tired eyes. Somewhere, deep in the folds of his mind, he remembered something the old doc had said about a woman seen riding south alone just before the storm, about a horse found wandering near Iron Ridge, saddle empty, stirrup broken. He never followed up on it. He hadn't known where to start, but now, with Lily asking, he had to. And somewhere out there, buried in snow and silence, was a truth waiting to be found. By the end of the week, Lily had packed a small satchel with her father's map, a pair of worn gloves, and the locket tucked carefully in a soft cloth. She wasn't running away. Nate knew that. But she was chasing something he couldn't hold her back from her beginning. She wasn't going alone, though. Nate wouldn't have it. They rode out before dawn, just the two of them, heading south through open prairie past the cottonwoods and creek beds that marked the edge of familiar country. The horses moved slow, steady under the weight of memory and hope. Neither of them said much the first day, but when they stopped near the ridge to camp, Nate finally spoke. I kept your blanket, he said, watching the fire crackle. I don't know why, it wasn't much use for anything, but something in me just couldn't throw it away. Lily looked over, her face calm, eyes reflective. I think part of me remembers it, she said. Not the way it looked. The way it felt. Like I was floating in it, safe, even if I was cold. Nate nodded. I used to worry that when you grew up you'd wish I'd done more, found her, given you answers. I used to, Lily said softly. But now, I think I just needed to grow into the asking. They camped that night beneath a sky thick with stars, no roof but the heavens, no sound but the horses shifting gently and the wind brushing through dry grass. Nate watched her sleep, her face peaceful, the firelight flickering against her cheek, and felt both pride and dread settle deep in his bones. He'd raised her to be strong, and now she was strong enough to walk into the past without him holding her hand. The next few days blurred into a rhythm of dusty trails and quiet towns. They stopped at outposts, asked questions, showed the locket to old-timers whose eyes had seen too much and remembered too little. Most shook their heads. Some offered stories about lost women, broken wagons, snowstorms that swallowed entire wagons, but nothing that pointed them anywhere real. Then, in a place called Birch Hollow, barely more than 5 buildings and a church, a gray-haired postmaster named Alma squinted at the locket and paused. Seen one like this? She said, voice slow, like molasses. Long time ago. Belonged to a girl named Eliza Thatcher, quiet thing. Came through here heavy with child. Didn't stay long. Lily's breath caught. Did she leave a name at the boarding house? Didn't stay at the house, slept in the stable for one night, then disappeared. Left behind a note no one could read. Just gone. They stayed in Birch Hollow that night. Lily walked the edges of the town, imagining a scared young woman with swollen ankles and hollow eyes trying to find warmth in a place that didn't ask questions. She couldn't shake the thought that Eliza, if that was her name, might have ridden straight into that storm on purpose. Not to die, but to disappear. Nate found her sitting outside the church, hat in her lap, eyes wet, but steady. Do you think she regrets it? Lily asked. Giving me up? Nate sat beside her, hands calloused and still. If she loved you, I imagine she's prayed every day that you'd find something better than what she could give. And you did. Lily turned to him, voice low. I want to believe that, I do. But I still wish I could see her. Just once. even from far off. He rested a hand on her shoulder. Then we keep looking. And they did. With a name, a thread, and a bit of fire in their chests, they followed the trail across 2 more towns. The further they rode, the more Lily began to see herself not just as someone abandoned, but as someone chosen, for survival, for hope, for a second chance. That realization didn't fill every empty space inside her, but it did plant something, a seed of peace. And by the time they reached the town of Elmsbridge, where an old woman with deep lines around her mouth mentioned a girl named Eliza who once worked the bakery for just one winter, it was clear. The trail hadn't gone cold. It was warming. Slowly. Like spring after a long, bitter snow, Elmsbridge was the kind of town where folks remembered your name if you'd passed through 30 winters ago, especially if you brought bread instead of trouble. The woman who owned the bakery now, Miss Claudine, had worked under Eliza back then, just a teenager herself. Her memory was sharp, even if her hands had stiffened with age. She was kind, Claudine said, pressing dough on the floured table. Didn't talk much, but she'd sing sometimes when she thought I wasn't listening. Sweet voice, sad though, like the kind you hear in empty church pews. Lily listened with her eyes fixed on the tabletop. Do you remember where she went after? Claudine wiped her hands and shook her head. One day she just didn't come back, no goodbye, no note, just gone, like she was afraid of being found. That night, back at the small inn, Lily sat by the window watching the snow fall soft and slow over the rooftops. Nate brewed coffee on the wood stove, the scent filling the room like warmth in the cold. She left pieces of herself everywhere, Lily murmured, like she wanted to be remembered but not found. Nate handed her a cup and sat down across from her. Maybe she was trying to protect you, or maybe she thought disappearing was the only kindness she had left. Lily nodded, slowly. I think I'm starting to understand that. The next day they followed a new thread. Claudine had mentioned that Eliza once wrote letters, always the same return address, Dry Fork Ridge. It was a few days' ride north, high up near the timberline, mostly trappers and old miners. Not many people stayed, but maybe, just maybe, someone remembered a young woman with eyes like winter sky. They rode out at dawn, through frost-covered meadows and winding mountain trails. The land grew harsher the higher they climbed. Trees bowed under snow, wind whistling, low and mean through the pines. By the 3rd night they were camped near an old hunting shack, the fire struggling to keep the cold at bay. Lily pulled her coat tighter. Do you think I'm chasing a ghost? Nate looked up from the flames. Maybe. But even ghosts deserve to be remembered, right? That night, Lily dreamed of a woman kneeling in snow, her hands trembling as she wrapped a baby in a blanket. Nate's blanket. She whispered something Lily couldn't hear, tears freezing on her cheeks, and then she stood and walked into the storm without looking back. Lily woke with tears in her eyes and a name on her lips. Eliza. They reached Dry Fork Ridge by midday, a scattering of cabins, a smokehouse, and a general store. Most cabins were shuttered up tight, but an old man named Jonas remembered Eliza. Said she'd stayed in his spare room during a rough winter. He looked at Lily, then at the locket, and nodded like something inside him had finally settled. She was running, he said simply, never said from what, but she carried herself like someone with too much sorrow for her years. Lily's voice cracked. Did she ever mention a child? Jonas took a long breath. Once. Said she had a daughter. Said she hoped someone better than her was raising her. Lily pressed a hand to her chest. She was sick when she left. Jonas continued. I don't think she made it far. There's a grave down in the ravine, small cross, no name. They rode down slow. Snow had blanketed the trail, but the cross still stood, tilted, weathered, but there. Nate brushed off the snow gently. Beneath, carved by hand, were the words, for Lily. I'm sorry I couldn't stay. Lily didn't cry right away. She just knelt, resting her fingers against the wood. The wind sighed through the trees like it had been waiting years to speak. She left me everything she had, Lily whispered. Her name, her love, even this sadness. Nate stood behind her, silent, watching the weight lift from her shoulders in slow, quiet inches. She never stopped loving me, Lily said. Even when she let me go. And finally the tears came. Not from loss, but from the soft, aching shape of closure. That night, under the same stars she'd been born beneath, Lily placed her hand over her heart and said thank you to the woman she never knew but always carried with her. The snow fell gentler the next morning, as if the sky itself was tired of holding back. Lily stood at the grave for a long while, just watching it, not saying much. Her gloved fingers traced the carved words again and again, like touching the truth might make it sink in deeper. Nate didn't rush her. He just waited, letting the quiet settle like fresh snow. When they finally turned to leave, Lily paused. She reached into her saddlebag and pulled out the old hat, her father's hat, creased and weathered, edges curled by years of wind and sun. She knelt, placed it gently at the foot of the wooden cross, and whispered, "For both of you." Her eyes shimmered, not with grief now, but with something calmer, something closer to peace. The ride back down the ridge was quiet. They didn't talk much. There was no need. Something had shifted, not just in Lily, but between them. A gentleness, a shared silence that meant understanding. By the time they returned to town, the air was clearer, the cold less biting. They stayed in Elmsbridge for a few more days. Lily spent time at the old bakery, talking with Claudine, helping her knead bread, listening to stories of her mother that she never thought she'd get to hear. Eliza had been quiet, yes, but kind. She once gave her winter boots to a stranger who'd lost his in the river. She used to sing when she swept the floors. She never spoke of her past, but she always looked like she was carrying it. On the third morning, Lily stood outside the bakery, watching folks go about their lives, kids tossing snowballs, horses steaming in the cold, a shopkeeper dusting off his sign. Nate stepped beside her with 2 mugs of coffee. "You thinking of heading home?" he asked. Lily looked around. "I think I found what I came for," she said. "But it doesn't feel like an ending. More like a door that finally opened." They left Elmsbridge before noon, riding slow. The sky was wide and pale, the kind of quiet blue that felt like a promise. On the trail, Lily pulled out a folded letter she'd written the night before. She handed it to Nate. "What's this?" he asked. "For you. To read when we're back," she said. It's about what I found. And what I want." He nodded, tucking it away. But he didn't need the letter to know. That evening, they reached Nate's ranch. The wind had picked up, curling around the cabins and fences like old memories trying to come home. Lily stepped down from her horse and just stood there for a moment, staring at the place where her life had begun. The porch, the roofline, the stack of firewood still beside the door. So much was different, yet so much hadn't changed at all. Inside, the fire was already lit. Nate's mother, gray-haired now, a little slower but still sharp, was setting soup on the stove. She turned when she saw Lily and smiled with soft, knowing eyes. "I always wondered if we'd see you again," she said. "You used to laugh in your sleep, did you know that?" Lily blinked. "No, I didn't." "You were a happy baby," she said. "Even with all the world waiting outside, you were happy here." That night Lily sat by the fire, the same one she'd been found beside. She looked over at Nate, then at his mother, then around the room, walls lined with old photos, worn chairs, the sound of horses shifting in the barn outside, and something settled inside her. Belonging. Not because she was owed it, not because she'd earned it, but because it had always been quietly waiting, like a warm coat left by the door. She reached into her coat and pulled out a tiny worn baby blanket, the one she'd been wrapped in. She handed it to Nate's mother. "I think this belonged here all along." The older woman took it, eyes welling, and nodded. "So did you." It took time to settle in, not just unpacking saddlebags, but letting the walls of her heart understand they could rest here. Lily wasn't sure how long she'd stay. Nate never asked. He just made room. Extra firewood stacked by her door, a saddle repaired and waiting, a gentle rhythm in the way he handed her coffee each morning without words. It was the kind of care that asked nothing back. Most days she rode out with him, checking fences, watching the sky for signs of another storm. Sometimes they didn't speak at all, just moved side by side like they'd done this all their lives. In the quiet moments, she caught herself, glancing at him, wondering if this was what her mother might have wanted for her all along. A life not built from running or hiding, but from choosing. One cold morning, Nate handed her an old journal he'd found in the attic. "Think it might have been your father's," he said. The cover was cracked leather, soft and faded. Lily sat by the fire and opened it slowly. Inside were scrawled notes, weather patterns, cattle counts, but here and there, pieces of something deeper. "Still think of her at the edge of every day," one entry read. Another said, "Buried the ring under the birch tree. Couldn't bear to wear it. Couldn't bear to let it go." One final note, dated just a few days before his death, read, "And if I see her again, I'll say sorry. I'll tell her I tried." Lily's hands trembled. The man who'd raised her was gone before she could ask him why. But through those pages she heard his voice in a way she never had before. Tired, trying, full of love he didn't always know how to show. That night she walked out to the birch tree just behind the barn. The snow was light again, a soft dusting over the earth. She knelt and dug with her bare hands. Just a few inches down she hit something hard. An old tin box. Inside was a small gold ring, simple and worn, initials etched inside. E+R. She held it tight in her palm, the cold biting but something warm blooming inside her chest. He had loved her mother, maybe not perfectly, but fiercely, and maybe that was enough. In the following weeks, Lily began helping around the ranch more seriously. Branding season was coming and the hands needed organizing. She picked things up quick. Nate noticed. So did the others. One evening after supper, the youngest ranch hand, Cole, grinned at her. "You sure you ain't the boss around here already?" he teased. Lily laughed. A real laugh, full and easy. "Not yet," she said. "But maybe someday." Nate looked up from across the table. "You already are," he said, soft enough that only she could really hear it. As the days stretched into spring, the snow melted into muddy paths and green patches. Flowers pushed through the frost, wild and stubborn. Lily spent mornings with Nate's mother, who showed her how to bake cornbread and brew strong coffee the way her father had liked it. "He always left the spoon in the cup," she smiled. "Drove me crazy." "I'd do the same," Lily said, and they both laughed. It was during one of those mornings that a letter arrived, sealed in wax, addressed to Lily. She opened it carefully. It was from Claudine back in Elmsbridge. Inside was a single photo, a younger Eliza holding a baby in a blanket, standing next to Lily's father in front of the cabin. They both looked tired, but there was something unmistakable in their faces. Hope. On the back, Claudine had written, "You were loved more than you know, and now you've come home twice over." Lily sat on the porch for a long while after that, photo in hand, the wind tugging at her hair. Nate came and sat beside her. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded. "Yeah," she whispered. I think I'm finally all right." They sat there as the sun dipped low over the hills, casting gold across the land. Horses stirred in the paddock, and somewhere in the distance a hawk cried out. Lily looked over at Nate and smiled. "Do you think it's possible to belong to more than one place, more than one story?" Nate didn't answer right away. He reached over, took her hand, and gave it a squeeze. "I think you've always belonged," he said. "You just had to ride far enough to see it." Spring stretched its fingers across the valley, chasing out the last frost like a quiet promise. Grass thickened, calves dropped into the world with wide eyes and wobbling legs, and life moved forward. Not fast, not loud, but steady, like the rhythm of hooves on soft ground. Lily began to lose track of how long she'd been there. It no longer felt like she was visiting. This land, this life, it was beginning to feel like hers. One afternoon, she rode out alone past the old Northridge. The place was quiet except for the wind rustling through tall grass. From a distance, she spotted something, an old wagon half buried in the brush. Curiosity got the better of her, so she dismounted and pulled back the bramble. It was little, more than a frame, but tucked beneath the seat she found a rusted tin with papers sealed in oilskin. Inside, time-stained documents, a photo, and a note written in her mother's hand. "If anything ever happens, tell her the truth. Tell her, I was trying to give her a better life." Lily pressed the paper to her chest. Her knees sank into the dirt. The ache of questions she'd buried rose back up, but not with bitterness. This time it was different. She could almost hear her mother's voice in the wind, and it didn't haunt her anymore. It steadied her. That night, she sat with Nate, On the porch, the stars spilled across the sky like lanterns hung by angels. "I found a piece of her today," Lily said softly. He glanced over, waiting. "She was trying," she said. "Running maybe, but not away from me. She was running toward something safer. She must have thought she'd come back." Nate gave a slow nod. "People do the best they can most times, even when it doesn't look like it. I wish I could." "Tell her it was enough," Lily whispered. "You just did," he said. There was a long, warm silence between them after that. Lily looked down at the ring now hanging from a chain around her neck, her father's gift to her mother, buried for years under a birch tree, now resting close to her own heart. She felt like she was carrying them both forward in some quiet way, not trapped by the past but tethered to it with grace. A few days later, the town of Twin Hollow was holding its spring gathering. Lily hadn't been back since she first rode, through in the snowstorm. But this time she wasn't a stranger. Folks tipped their hats. Mrs. Langston gave her a long hug and whispered, "Your mama would have been proud, sweetheart." There was music and laughter and the kind of joy that doesn't shout but hums like a lullaby. Nate asked her to dance, not with a grand gesture, just a hand held out and a quiet look that said, "If you want to." She smiled, took his hand, and they swayed under lantern light and open sky. "I never thought I'd find this," she said. "What's that?" he asked. "Peace," she replied. "Not the kind where everything's fixed, but the kind where I don't need it to be." His eyes softened. Maybe that's all any of us ever really want. Later that night they sat by the fire. Nate's mother had gone to bed early, and the ranch hands were still down in town. Just the two of them now, quiet and calm. Lily turned toward him. "Do you think there's a reason I found her that day, in the storm?" "I think you were meant to," he said. "And maybe she was meant to bring you back here." Lily reached into her satchel and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. She handed it to Nate. Inside was a worn, weathered hat, his father's, the one she'd carried all these years, hidden away until now. "I think this belongs home too," she said. Nate stared at it for a long moment, eyes wet but unmoving. "I thought I'd never see this again." "It's yours," she said. "It always was." He took it in both hands, quiet reverence passing between them like a prayer, and in that moment, beneath the stars, beside the fire, surrounded by horses, breathing slow and earth that remembered everything, they sat together in the fullness of what had been lost and found, together, without needing to speak. The past was still there, but so was the future. The next morning came with a hush of soft rain, a rarity in those parts. The kind that didn't drum hard on the roof but just tapped, gentle and steady, like the land was exhaling. Lily stood by the window of the old ranch house, coffee in hand, watching the drops trace down the glass. There was a calm in her she hadn't known before, like the ache that used to sit behind her ribs had finally loosened its grip. But peace, as she was learning, didn't mean the story was done. It meant you were strong enough to carry the rest. That day, Nate pulled out an old ledger from the barn. It belonged to his father. Notes about cattle, winter feed, a few doodles in the margins, and then something else. A name. Repeated. Lydia. Her mother's name. Lily sat down beside him. He knew her? Nate nodded slowly. "I always thought they met only that night, but this shows he was keeping track. Looks like they'd written letters before she showed up." "Letters?" Lily leaned in. "I never found any," Nate said. "But that don't mean they're not out there." Something about that made her feel like a candle had flickered on inside her chest. For years, she'd thought her arrival at that ranch was pure chance. A mother running from something, a baby left at a doorstep. But this hinted at something deeper. At love. At intention. That afternoon she rode out to the old line shack, where Nate's father used to camp when the cattle were out farther. Tucked beneath a floorboard, wrapped in waxed cloth, were a bundle of letters. Her mother's handwriting on each envelope. She read them by lantern light, one after another, and as she did, tears came. Quiet and heavy, but not bitter. The letters spoke of hope, of fear, of a man who made her feel safe, of a baby she wanted more than anything but didn't know how to protect. One letter ended with, "If this child ever finds you, tell her I didn't leave her. I left her with someone I trusted more than myself." Lily pressed the paper to her chest. The ache, the questions, the empty places. Suddenly, they weren't hollow anymore. They were full of her mother's voice, of choices made out of love, not abandonment. That night she brought the letters to Nate. She loved you both, she said, in the only way she knew how. Nate sat beside her, holding the papers like they were made of gold. I guess I never really knew how much he carried either. They sat there for a long while. No need for more words. The next few weeks, something in Lily began to shift. She worked the ranch like she always had, but now with a sense of belonging that came from the inside out. She wasn't filling a gap anymore, she was building something, and the townsfolk noticed too. The mayor asked her to help with the upcoming harvest fair. Mrs. Langston insisted she speak at church on Sunday. "Just say what's in your heart, darling," she said. "You've got a voice people listen to." Lily wasn't sure what she'd say yet. But for the first time, she wasn't afraid to speak. She was part of something now. Late one evening, as the last rays of sun dipped below the hills, she and Nate stood by the fence line. "You ever think about staying here?" Nate asked, not looking at her. "I already am," she said, and he turned toward her, surprised. "I thought you were still figuring things out." "I was," she said, "but I found the answers I needed, and some I didn't even know I was looking for." He smiled, small, genuine, the kind that goes straight to the heart. "I'm glad you came back." "I didn't just come back," she said. "I came home." He reached out and gently took her hand. No fanfare, no grand declarations, just warmth. Behind them, the land stretched wide and golden. The cattle moved slowly in the fields. A hawk circled high above. And in that quiet, Lily felt the pull of roots finally sinking into soil, deep, steady, real. The storm that once brought her had passed, and in its place was something stronger than survival, something close to love. The morning of the harvest fair came with the kind of crisp air that carried wood smoke and the laughter of children echoing off the hills. Lily rode into town early, her father's hat snug on her head, the brim slightly frayed but proud. Folks nodded to her now, not out of curiosity but recognition. She wasn't a mystery anymore. She was part of the story. At the center of town, hay bales were stacked into makeshift seats, and gingham tablecloths covered the long food tables. There was pie cooling on windowsills and fiddles warming up near the church steps. And when Lily stepped up to the old wooden stage, folks quieted. They didn't know what she'd say. Truth was, neither did she. Not at first. She looked out at the people, the ranchers, the teachers, the old men with worn boots, and the children tugging at their mothers' aprons. Her eyes landed on Nate, leaning against a post, arms folded, gaze steady. Then she took a breath. "I used to think I was dropped into this land by accident," she began, her voice soft but sure, "found in a storm, raised by strangers. But what I've come to realize is, sometimes what feels like being left behind is actually being guided home." The crowd stayed still, quiet in that respectful Western way. "My mother didn't abandon me, and she gave me to someone she trusted, and that man, Nate's father, he didn't see a burden. He saw a beginning. I didn't understand it growing up. I was angry, lost. But I see it now. This place, these hands, this work, it gave me something I didn't know I needed." A few heads nodded, and Mrs. Langston dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief. "I'm not here to make some big speech," Lily said. "Just wanted to say thank you for letting me come back, for giving me a chance to stay." And with that, she stepped down. No applause burst forth, just the kind of deep silence that speaks louder than clapping. The kind that says, "We heard you." Later that evening, as the fair buzzed with fiddle tunes and the smell of roasting corn, Lily found herself sitting beside Nate on the porch of the sheriff's office, sharing a jar of apple cider. "You did good today," he said quietly. "I just spoke the truth. That's the only thing worth saying." There was a pause. Then he added, "You know, Dad used to sit right here after these fairs. Said he liked watching the light fade from town, see who lingered." "I can see why," she said, watching, the lantern's glow against the darkening sky. Nate turned to her, something tender in his voice. "What now, Lily?" She thought for a moment. "Now? I rebuild what was lost. One day, one fence post, one supper at a time. I stay. If you'll have." He chuckled softly. "We had you the moment you showed up in the snow." She leaned her head against his shoulder, not rushed, not romantic just for the sake of it, but warm, real. Across the street, a little girl in braids ran past holding a cornbread muffin, and Lily smiled. Life was happening slow and steady, just the way it should. Back at the ranch, her old saddlebag sat by the hearth. Inside it, the last letter her mother had written, one she hadn't opened yet. That night, with firelight dancing on the walls and the quiet hum of crickets outside, Lily unfolded it. If you're reading this, it means you found your way back. I always believed you would. And when you do, don't live in my shadow. Build something new. Be braver than I was. Love the land, and let it love you back. Tears came, but they were soft now, healing, not breaking. She folded the letter slowly, then tucked it beside her father's old hat. 2 lives, 2 sacrifices, and a future that finally felt like hers to write. The first frost came early that year, brushing silver across the pasture grass and painting the barn roof in delicate ice. Lily stood by the fence with her arms resting on the top rail, watching the sun melt through the cold, turning the hills gold. The world was quiet, not because it was empty, but because it was full of memory, of promise, of peace. It had been nearly a year since she'd come back. The ranch was no longer just a name on an old deed. It was home again. The barn had been repaired, the chicken coop rebuilt. There were new colts in the paddock and fresh rows of squash in the garden. Each nail she'd hammered, every plank she'd set, she'd done it with her own hands, and yet, never alone. Coffee's hot, Nate called from the porch, mug in, hand. She turned and smiled, brushing her fingers off on her coat. I'll be right there. He waited like he always did, patient, steady. When she sat beside him on the steps, their boots bumped lightly. He handed her the mug, steam curling into the morning air. You ever think about how different things might have gone? He asked. All the time, she said. If your father hadn't found me. If I'd never come back. He looked off across the pasture. Funny how life works. You lose something, think it's gone for good, then one day it rides right back into town wearing your old man's hat. She laughed softly. I used to think that hat was all I had left, a reminder of something unfinished. But now it's not about what I lost. It's about what I was given. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small item wrapped in cloth. Inside was a silver baby bracelet, tarnished but intact. I found it buried deep in the saddlebag. My name was etched on the inside, Lillian May. My mother must have put it there the night she left me. He held it gently, then handed it back. You gonna keep it? I think I'll pass it on someday, she said. To someone who needs to know that love never really lets go. It just waits until we're ready. A gust of wind rolled through the valley, bending the grass like waves, and somewhere in the distance a hawk called out over the ridgeline. Everything felt still, then alive. That afternoon, Lily rode out to the same trail where she'd first stumbled in from the snow. She dismounted and stood under the pine trees, their trunks tall and unwavering. In her hand was the last thing she needed to return. A small wooden horse, carved by Nate's father, tucked in her blanket when he'd carried her into the cabin all those years ago. She set it at the base of the tree and whispered, "Thank you for choosing me." Then she turned and walked back toward her horse. As she mounted, she looked toward the horizon, not searching, but knowing. She didn't have all the answers, but she had something better, belonging. And as she rode home, hat tilted low, saddle creaking in rhythm with her breath, she felt it settle deep inside her. The peace of a long journey, come full circle. The kind of ending that isn't really an ending at all, just the start of something softer, something earned, something whole. If you stayed with Lily all the way through this story, thank you. It means a lot. Let us know how it touched you, and where in the world you're watching from. And if you felt even a flicker of something true here, go ahead and subscribe. I've got more stories on the trail for you real soon, ones that just might stay with you a while.